Hello and welcome to Beyond Pathogens, uncovering alternate causes of common digestive symptoms. My name is Melissa Gentile, and before we get started, I want to go over some housekeeping items. All attendees are in listen-only mode, so if you have questions during the presentation, please submit them as a comment. There's going to be time at the end for a Q&A, and we'll answer all your questions at that time. And now I'm excited to introduce you to our speaker, Adair Anderson. Adair Anderson is an Idaho-based registered dietitian nutritionist and health optimizer on a mission to help others lead a healthy and happy life. She holds a bachelor's degree in biochemistry and a master's degree in clinical nutrition. In her role as a product marketing educator at Vibrant Wellness, Adair excels at product education. She creates presentations with a logical flow, weaving in carefully crafted analogies that inspire aha light bulb moments, making learning easy and fun. Additionally, Adair has a decade of experience helping clients resolve root cause digestive conditions through functional lab testing, virtual nutrition coaching, and personalized anti-inflammatory eating plans in her private practice, Eating with Integrity. When she isn't working, you can find Adair exercising with her hubby in the Idaho wilderness, tending her garden, or relaxing with a good book. Welcome, Adair.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Melissa. It's a pleasure to be presenting on my favorite topic. So here are the learning objectives for today's presentation. First, we're going to identify and explore common dysbiosis patterns using Vibrant's gut tumor stool test. Then we're going to apply new research on barrier integrity, digestion absorption, and flora in identifying and managing digestive dysfunction. And finally, I will help you expand your toolkit by sharing strategies to improve and maintain gut health in your practice. Before we dive in, I want to tell you a little story. While I'm currently on the Vibrant marketing team, I used to be a clinical lab educator for Vibrant Wellness. In that role, I spent over 1,000 hours providing consultations to healthcare providers, explaining how to interpret their patients' functional lab test results. Out of the 40-plus tests that Vibrant Wellness offers, I consulted on the gut tumor the most. Now, combining those consults with my private practice clients, I've viewed hundreds of gut tumor results to date. Some providers knew next to nothing and were happy for any guidance I could provide. Others came in with expectations. In fact, I met with several healthcare providers who expected to find a pathogen on their patient's gut tumor results, since their patient was complaining of urgency and diarrhea. In those instances, I got to explain that while pathogens can cause those symptoms, dysbiosis is a more likely culprit. As you can imagine, patterns started to emerge after reviewing hundreds of gut tumor results, and I'm excited to share my insights with you today. Here are the 3 types of dysbiosis I see most often: low diversity dysbiosis, digestive insufficiency dysbiosis, and inflammatory dysbiosis. Let's start with low diversity dysbiosis. Low diversity dysbiosis is usually the result of starving or destroying your commensal microbes. Knowing that, can you think of how a client with low diversity dysbiosis might present? Imagine a client with IBS who learned about the low FODMAP diet online, skipped the reintroduction phase, and has been avoiding FODMAPs for years. Or someone who eats a standard American diet, getting only 16 grams of fiber per day compared to the 25 to 34 grams per day recommended by the 2020 to 2025 dietary guidelines for Americans. Without adequate fiber, these patients often complain of constipation, backup bloat, gas, and abdominal pain. Antimicrobials can also contribute to low diversity. There's ample research showing antibiotics disrupt the gut microbiome. There are also studies showing gut microbiome alterations following glyphosate exposure. However, the concentrations of glyphosate used in these studies were often above the acceptable daily intake. While more research is needed to define the associations between glyphosate levels in humans and gut microbiome signatures, the article on the right affirms the European Food Safety Authority announced that glyphosate is no longer authorized for use in the European Union since December of 2023. Low diversity dysbiosis is characterized by low diversity indices such as the Shannon's index, low short-chain fatty acid levels, especially butyrate, and a deficiency of short-chain fatty acid-producing bacteria, including keystone species like Roseburia intestinalis and Fecalibacterium prosnitzi. Now, all ecosystems have strength in diversity, and low gut diversity is correlated with many chronic diseases. Microbial diversity is a measure of the number of different microorganisms and the amount of each in the stool sample provided. The two main factors that help quantify diversity are richness and evenness, which can be measured by the Shannon's and Symptoms Index, respectively. The Shannon's Index is a measure of diversity used by members of the scientific community to compare results over time. Shannon's Index looks at richness, and it answers the question, are all the species present or not? For Vibrance Gut Zoomer, less than 1.5 is low diversity. Between 1.5 and 2.5 is moderate diversity, and greater than 2.5 is high diversity. Basically, the higher the number, the better the diversity. This begs the question, where do we get our microbiome? Well, we inherit our microbiome from our mom when we're born. Generally, the gut microbiota of vaginally born infants is first colonized by bacteria from the maternal vagina, which is characterized by enrichment in Prevotella and Lactobacillus. In contrast, the gut microbiota of infants born via C-section indicates relative resemblance to the maternal skin, and the oral microbiota dominated by Proteobacterium, Corynebacterium, and Streptococcus. It has been suggested that disruption of the vaginal bacteria transmission via C-section can have long-term medical implications. For example, a few studies reported that C-section delivery increases the incidence of celiac disease, obesity, and asthma. Side note, you can't inherit more diversity than your mom has, which is how microbial diversity declines over generations in families who consume low-fiber diets. In this diagram, the mom starts with 90% microbial diversity and gives her high Shannon's Index to her daughter, represented by green clothing. However, her daughter eats a low-fiber diet and ends up with 70% microbial diversity. When she gives birth, she gives a moderate Shannon's to her daughter, represented by orange clothing. But the orange daughter also eats a low-fiber diet and grows up having a low Shannon's Index, which she passes on to her son, represented by red clothing. So what else impacts our microbiome? Well, everything you eat or drink, along with the environment you're exposed to. For example, were you breastfed or formula fed? How quickly did your parents introduce solids? Were you allowed to play in the dirt? Did you have pets in the house? Did anyone use herbicides in your neighborhood? And did you have a lot of ear infections requiring antibiotics, especially before the age of 2? While Shannon's Index indicates low diversity, I usually skip ahead to the panel on short-chain fatty acids to gain additional insight. If someone has low diversity dysbiosis, you'll likely see low levels of short-chain fatty acids. Now, as you likely know, gut bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids by fermenting mainly undigested dietary carbohydrates like resistant starch and dietary fiber, and to a lesser extent, dietary and endogenous proteins. So saccharolytic fermentation produces butyrate, acetate, and propionate, and proteolytic fermentation produces valerate. I look at the total amount of short-chain fatty acids first. The reference range indicates that we want short-chain fatty acid levels between 45 and 210 micromoles per gram of stool. In this example, the patient's levels are at 20.7, which is pretty gosh darn low. In addition to total short-chain fatty acid deficiency, this patient also has extremely low levels of butyrate, only 3.4% when it should be between 5 and 12%. Now, why is this result so alarming? Well, this result is alarming because short-chain fatty acids, especially butyrate, are essential for gut integrity. Short-chain fatty acids are the preferred source of fuel for colonocytes, contributing to about 2/3 of their energy requirements. And really, butyrate is their favorite. In fact, evidence shows that colonocytes use 95% of the butyrate present in the colon. In other words, short-chain fatty acid deficiency is evidence not only of starved commensal bacteria, but also malnourished colonocytes. Short-chain fatty acids also help maintain intestinal barrier function. They do this by stimulating mucus production and by modulating expression of tight junction proteins. In this way, they help heal and seal intestinal hyperpermeability. Microbial short-chain fatty acid production also affects mucosal immune function by stimulating the production of antimicrobial peptides. There's even studies showing that people with higher short-chain fatty acid levels had better COVID outcomes. Finally, short-chain fatty acids promote the growth of new cells and repair of damaged cells, and in fact, citation number 1 elucidates the mechanism behind which butyrate can halt cancer cell growth. The most common cause of low short-chain fatty acids is a diet low in fermentable fiber, especially prebiotics, polyphenols, and resistant starch. You can also see low short-chain fatty acid levels when patients are on a restricted diet due to chronic illness, such as kidney disease or a Crohn's flare. It can also be caused by severe dysbiosis, chronic antibiotic use leading to a decimation of those short-chain fatty acid-producing bacteria, and inflammation. However, sometimes transit time contributes to low short-chain fatty acids in the stool sample provided. For example, diarrhea causing rapid transit of those fermentable fibers through the colon leads to decreased short-chain fatty acid production. Think of it as literal fast food. It's difficult for microbes to ferment fibers when the fibers are literally flying past them at jet speed. On the flip side, constipation increases colonic absorption of the short-chain fatty acids, so they are no longer present at the time of stool collection. The way you can rule out diarrhea and constipation impacting short-chain fatty acid levels, and to provide additional evidence that the patient isn't eating adequate fiber, is to look at the patient's levels of short-chain fatty acid-producing bacteria. Here are well-known butyrate, acetate, and propionate-producing bacteria, and note this list is not exhaustive. For those who don't know, SPP is an abbreviation that means several species, and I've included specific species in parentheses. Another key point to keep in mind is that, in addition to fermenting carbohydrates, several bacterial species like Roseburia intestinalis and Faecalibacterium prausnitzii can also convert acetate to butyrate. The blue arrow indicates that Roseburia and Faecalibacterium will take acetate produced by Akkermansia muciniphila and turn it into butyrate. You can find short-chain fatty acid-producing bacteria on the gut zoomer by looking at the gut commensals panel. If the short-chain fatty acid-producing bacteria are low, aka in the red and less than 10, like Akkermansia here at 3.6, that indicates short-chain fatty acids are truly low. So, what is the intervention if you find low diversity indices, low short-chain fatty acids, and low short-chain fatty acid-producing bacteria on your patient's stool test? Well, feed the bacteria you want to see more of, specifically aiming for 30 types of plants per week, eating fermented foods daily, and including prebiotics, resistant starches, and polyphenols. And here's the evidence. According to the 2018 American Gut Project paper, eating 30 types of plants per week is associated with greater microbial diversity than self-reported categories such as being vegan or vegetarian. In other words, the number of plants you're eating is more important than eating only plants. The authors used a partial least squares approach to identify several short-chain fatty acid fermenters associated with eating more than 30 types of plants, and they went on to postulate that, quote, because bacteria differ in their carbohydrate-binding molecules and enzymes that hydrolyze diverse substrates in the gut, a diet containing various types of dietary fibers and resistant starches likely supports a more diverse microbial community. According to both this 2021 article in Cell and his March 22 appearance on the Huberman Lab podcast, Dr. Justin Sonnenberg affirms that consuming 6 servings of fermented foods daily improves microbial diversity more than eating a high-fiber diet. Didn't see that one coming. If you look at the highlighted section, the authors wrote, quote, in contrast to the high-fiber diet arm, the microbiota of participants consuming a high-fermented foods diet exhibited an overall increase in alpha diversity over the course of the intervention. Here's research from a 2017 article providing evidence that prebiotic fibers feed commensal gut microbes. Reading the highlighted section again, bacteria possess carbohydrate-binding modules and an extensive set of enzymes that allow the hydrolysis of a wide variety of fibers. Therefore, having a variety of dietary fibers, for example, cellulose, hemicelluloses, pectin gums, fructan, and resistant starches in the diet that contain a range of monosaccharide units and alpha and beta linkages is supportive of a varied gastrointestinal microbial community. And according to the 2022 review published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, resistant starch supplementation is tolerated in both healthy subjects and those with underlying medical conditions, was shown to increase short-chain fatty acid production in most of the studies. And also, dose can be quite high. In 14 studies, resistant starch supplementation was tolerated with a dose between 20 and 40 grams per day. That's 2 to 4 teaspoons of a typical resistant starch powder supplement. You can also get resistant starch from eating cooked and cooled rice, potatoes, and legumes. Note, it does not have to be cold when you eat it. Once the starch has been cooled and becomes resistant to human digestion, reheating it does not undo this. You can't unscramble an egg. A more precise way to give this recommendation to your clients is to recommend leftover rice, potatoes, and legumes. Here is a 2019 review article titled "The Effects of Polyphenols and Other Bioactives on Human Health." The article points out that, quote, "The primary mechanism of action of polyphenols was originally thought to lie in direct antioxidant effects. But impact goes beyond this. There is a bidirectional relationship between polyphenols and the gut microbiome. Specifically, polyphenols can modulate the composition of an individual's microbiome. For example, Akkermansia loves red polyphenols found in pomegranates, grapes, and cranberries. I've recently come to love prescribing polyphenols to clients because, unlike fiber, which some clients do not tolerate due to the increased gas and bloating associated with increased intake, most of my clients can tolerate increased intake of polyphenol-rich foods and/or a polyphenol supplement, which does not contain the same fiber load. Just one more reason to eat a rainbow. You can also increase intake via supplementation. If you have an online dispensary, you can search for supplements that contain these ingredients, as they are all shown to feed commensal bacteria and increase microbial diversity in the gut. I'm sure you've heard this before, but when giving fiber to clients, it's best to start low and go slow, especially for sensitive folks. I often recommend powder supplements to clients so they can start with maybe 1/8 scoop and slowly increase as tolerated. Because, adding fiber is a lot like weightlifting. If your goal is to bench press 100 pounds, you don't start with 100 pounds. Instead, you start with maybe 5-pound dumbbells. When that starts to feel easy, increase to 7.5, 10, 12.5, etc. You slowly build up over time, the muscles adapt, just like the bacteria in your gut adapt, and you don't get that same level of gas and bloating when eating the fiber. So to wrap up low diversity dysbiosis, I have a pop quiz for you. What do the Japanese have in their microbiome that folks in North America don't have? Go ahead and put your answer in the chat. What do Japanese have in their microbiome that folks in North America don't have? The answer is enzymes specific for digesting seaweed. According to the journal Science, Japanese people harbor enzymes in their intestinal bacteria that help them digest seaweed, enzymes that North Americans lack. What's more, Japanese may have first acquired these enzymes by eating bacteria that thrive on seaweed in the open ocean. In other words, feed it and it will grow. The second topic is digestive insufficiency dysbiosis. Digestive insufficiency dysbiosis is usually the result of stress or pharmaceuticals impeding the body's ability to break down food. This typically presents as indigestion, feeling full after eating very little, bloating, and distension after meals. Picturing indigestion, can you think of how a client with digestive insufficiency dysbiosis might present? Imagine an entrepreneur who is always seeming to be in fight or flight. Maybe they rate their stress as 7 out of 10, with 10 being high, and they have a tendency to fill every minute of every day, frequently multitasking while eating. As you know, stress is related to functional gastrointestinal disorders such as irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, and functional dyspepsia. It could also manifest in the client who complains of GERD, gastrointestinal reflux disease, and maybe they got put on a PPI, a proton pump inhibitor, and maybe they've been taking that PPI for a decade. According to the drug insert, the PPI Prilosec indicate that it's for short-term use only, short-term treatment, so 4 to 8 weeks, and that PPI therapy may be associated with increased risk of Clostridium difficile-associated diarrhea, as well as bone fracture. Certainly, without stomach acid, digestive enzymes, or bile, these patients often complain of early fullness, nausea, GERD, diarrhea, and undigested food in their stool. And since stomach acid is required for absorption of nutrients like iron, calcium, and B12, the patient may also present with micronutrient deficiencies. Digestive insufficiency dysbiosis, especially secondary to chronic stress, is characterized by low levels of pancreatic elastase, high levels of fecal fat, the presence of meat fiber or vegetable fiber, low secretory at IgA, and opportunistic overgrowth, especially of mouth bacteria. Pancreatic elastase is a useful indirect marker of pancreatic function. Unlike other pancreatic enzymes, elastase 1 does not degrade as it passes through the GI tract, so it is readily detectable in the stool. The reference range says greater than 200 is normal, but really 350 is optimal. Now, I rarely see results that are over 350 or under 100, but I often see results in the 200s, which I would consider suboptimal and would address. Additionally, anytime meat fiber or vegetable fiber are detected, it is indicative of inadequate chewing and a great opportunity to talk with your client about slowing down and chewing more. The fat malabsorption panel helps you determine if your client is making adequate bile. As you know, we need a critical level of bile to form mind cells and absorb dietary fats. So if you see an elevated fecal fat, it usually indicates that something is going on with their liver and or gallbladder. Now, if you suspect fat malabsorption, but this panel comes back in the green, you can always ask your client about any foul smelling or frothy stools that leave a ring of oil around the toilet bowl. Another marker that tends to be low due to chronic stress is secretory IgA. Certainly, you want to rule out other underlying causes such as chronic dysbiosis, antigen exposure, protein malnutrition, or immunocompromised status. But if your patient results indicate both digestive insufficiency and low secretory IgA, there's evidence that stress is contributing to their symptoms. When stool results indicate digestive insufficiency, that is a perfect opportunity to talk with your patient about the impact stress is having on their digestion. For example, what happens in the body when you're stressed? Well, your heart rate and blood pressure will increase, and your blood flow will be directed away from your digestive organs, digestive system, and into your arms and legs so you can run or fight. And this makes sense. Digesting your food is not a priority if you are about to be food. And when this happens once or twice a month, no big deal. But when the patient is stuck in fight or flight every day, all day, and blood flow is always being diverted away from the digestive organs, then those digestive organs become malnourished and they don't have the energy, nutrition needed to create adequate enzymes, acid, or bile. In fact, vagal nerve experts say we should be in rest and digest 80% of our day, 80. Good news, you can strengthen vagal tone and bring blood flow back to those digestive organs with deep diaphragmatic breathing, gargling, singing, and humming. If you want to learn more, check out Dr. Habib's book, Activate Your Vagus Nerve, Unleash Your Body's Natural Ability to Heal. So, how do you support natural digestion? The next couple of slides outlines the options I present to my clients and have them choose the approaches that speak to them. Number 1, eat with your circadian rhythm. Eat about the same times each day. Your digestive organs anticipate mealtime and begin making digestive juices before the food enters the mouth. As Dr. Sachin Panda explained on episode 115 of the Huberman Lab podcast, if you usually eat breakfast at 8 a.m., but one day wait until 10 a.m., your stomach will say, the food didn't come at 8, it came at 10, so maybe I'll be ready at 9 tomorrow. But then if you go back to eating at 8 a.m. the next day, your stomach may not be ready for food. An extreme example of this is waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning for an early morning flight. Most people aren't going to feel hungry that early. And if you force yourself to eat in preparation for a day of travel, you likely won't digest as well. This is when therapeutic use of digestive enzymes or betaine HCl can be really helpful to give you a boost of digestive power when your organs would otherwise be sleeping. Number 2, get into rest and digest with diaphragmatic 4-7-8 breathing before meals. What this looks like is breathing in for the count of 4, holding for 7, and then exhaling for the count of 8. Anytime your exhale is longer than your inhale, it tells the body everything is okay. Number 3, removing distractions when eating. For example, sitting down to eat, turning off the TV, putting your phone away. Really, when you eat, just eat. Be present when you eat. Number 4, one way to promote being in the moment is to make the meal feel more special. Maybe saying a prayer or otherwise giving gratitude for the nourishment you're about to receive. Perhaps using placemats or playing relaxing music. Anything to make it feel fancy. Number 5, using your senses. Have you ever started salivating at the sight of a juicy burger or the smell of cookies fresh out of the oven? That's your body getting a head start on digestion. In fact, up to 50% of your digestive juices are made during the cephalic phase of digestion. Digestion literally begins in the mind. Breathing in the aromas of food generates saliva flow and stimulates digestion, as does noticing textures and flavors of your food. Number 6, eat slow. Many of my clients are fast eaters, swallowing food before it's even fully masticated. Tips to help them chew more thoroughly include putting the fork down between bites, using chopsticks, or eating with a non-dominant hand. Or also engaging in lighthearted conversation can also promote slower eating. Number 7, hara-hachi-bu. Hara-hachi-bu is a Japanese term meaning eating until you're 80% full. It originated in the city of Okinawa, where people use this advice as a way to control their eating habits. Now, let's visualize this. Has anyone ever tried to clean out a peanut butter jar by filling it with water, then shaking it? If you completely fill the jar with water, the water doesn't move around much, and there isn't a lot of motion to lift the peanut butter from the sides of the jar. In contrast, if you fill the jar only partway, there's more room for the water to move around within the jar, creating more turbulence and greater lifting power. Just like trying to clean out a peanut butter jar, gastric digestion is most efficient when your stomach is not 100% full. I often use digestive supplements with clients, especially at the beginning of their treatment protocol. When the patient has low pancreatic elastase, I recommend a supplement with digestive enzymes. If they also have gluten sensitivity, I find a product with DPP4, which helps break down gluteomorphin. And if we've done food sensitivity testing and the client is reactive to many foods, I'll find a blend that includes enzymes for all major intolerances. Now, if they have elevated fecal fat, I'll include ox bile. And if they have a known liver gallbladder issue, I'll often recommend TUDCA for a short period of time just to get the bile flowing again. It does take bile to move bile, and sometimes bile gets sticky and sludgy. So adding a bolus of TUDCA for a bit of time can help get things moving again. And then, of course, I often recommend betaine HCl. Sometimes my clients ask, how long do I have to take these supplements? Do I have to take them forever? And my answer is no, of course not. In the beginning, taking these supplements can help support digestion as you're working to manage stress and get into rest and digest. But you may continue to benefit from additional digestive support when you have to eat maybe outside of your circadian rhythm, like before an early morning flight or when traveling across time zones. Or sometimes when you're stressed and having a hard time turning off that fight or flight before a meal. So not forever, but sometimes used therapeutically as needed. In addition to assisting digestion, stomach acid also aids in the absorption of iron, calcium, and B12. So if your clients had symptoms of maldigestion for a while, it's worth looking into and addressing micronutrient deficiencies. Gastric acid also helps kill any microorganisms that may have accidentally entered the body via the mouth. Which is why, when client results indicate digestive insufficiency, I often see many mouth bacteria above the reference range. This includes Porphyromonas gingivalis, a gram-negative oral anaerobe that is involved in the pathogenesis of periodontitis and is a member of more than 500 bacterial species that live in the oral cavity, including Acinetobacter, Bacteroides fragilis, Bacteroides frugatus, Enterococcus haemophilus, Micrococcus, Streptococcus, and Peptostreptococcus. As you know, bacteria can grow rather quickly, reproducing every 20 to 30 minutes. When you sleep, especially if you're a mouth breather, the bacteria in your mouth have the opportunity to grow swiftly. Now, if you sleep for 8 hours, they can reproduce 16 to 24 times. At worst, we're talking exponential growth here: 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, etc. Anytime my client has elevated levels of mouth bacteria, I ask them, do you brush your teeth in the morning? If so, is it before or after breakfast? If you wait to brush your teeth until after breakfast, you're swallowing all those microbes that grew in your mouth overnight. And if you have low stomach acid, which is the first line of defense, or inadequate bile, which is antimicrobial, you may be contributing to opportunistic bacterial overgrowth. I also encourage my clients to address any cavities and investigate any past tooth extractions or root canals, really anything contributing to oral dysbiosis. I have to say, many of my clients have seen symptom relief just by changing when they brush their teeth. Digestive insufficiency is one of the main root causes of SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And while we don't have time to take a deep dive into SIBO, I could do a whole webinar on just SIBO, I did want to share a slide from the Institute for Functional Medicine's GI Advanced Practice module I attended earlier this week. Notice that acidity and motility make up 2 out of the 5 core triggers of SIBO. And this makes sense. Number 1, stomach acid kills 99.9% of the bacteria we swallow. So if you have hypochlorhydria, low stomach acid, you inevitably allow more bacteria to get through the stomach and enter the GI tract. Number 2, slow motility or constipation. Think about rafting. If you're heading down Class 5 rapids, there's no way you're going to be docking your boat on the side of the river and building a house. However, if you're rafting down a lazy river, you might wash up on the shore, maybe near some fruit trees or a fishing hole, and decide to call that home. Note that motility also requires a functional migrating motor complex. For those who don't yet know, the migrating motor complex, or MMC for short, is known as the housekeeping wave of the stomach. It's similar to peristalsis, which is the wave-like action that gently pushes food down the digestive tract. However, while peristalsis is like tiny waves on the shore, the MMC is a huge tsunami wave forcefully sweeping everything in the small intestine, so undigested food, bacteria, etc., down to the colon for fermentation. The MMC is that gurgling sound you hear first thing in the morning when you haven't eaten. It also occurs 4 to 5 hours after a meal when you're feeling hungry for the next. And I'm here to tell you, embrace the gurgle. This is the most important thing you have at night to clean up the debris from last night's dinner, getting rid of bacteria so your small intestine becomes dishwasher clean. Unfortunately, acute gastroenteritis caused by E. coli, Salmonella, Shigella, and Campylobacter can turn off the MMC via molecular mimicry. And check out the references on this slide to learn more. And yes, there's a test to measure whether acute gastroenteritis has caused dysmotility in your patients. It's called the Candida plus IBS profile and includes the markers vinculin and cytolethal descending toxin B. Now, let me know if you want more information about this during the Q&A. Moving on to the final type of dysbiosis, inflammatory dysbiosis. So inflammatory dysbiosis usually does not exist by itself, but is often a combination of the previous 2 types of dysbiosis. When you have low levels of commensal bacteria, especially the keystone species that maintain that protective mucus layer, and high levels of opportunistic bacteria, especially the bacteria that produce endotoxin, those 2 ingredients tend to drive inflammation in the gut as the immune system is continually fighting threats it would not be exposed to in an optimally functioning gut. With inflammatory dysbiosis, the patient will usually either have acute symptoms like bloody diarrhea or chronic GI symptoms that have gotten worse over time. Key markers of inflammatory dysbiosis includes elevated inflammation markers. And the elevated inflammation markers are often driven by elevated inflammatory LPS bacteria, like E. coli, and or the presence or hints of pathogens, both of which contribute to a low Simpson's index. With inflammatory dysbiosis, there's often a breakdown of the intestinal barrier, which can be affirmed by zonulin and anti-gliadin. Let's go into more details of this now. Many times, opportunistic overgrowth is driving inflammatory dysbiosis. To confirm this, I look at Simpson's index. Now, while Shannon's index looks at richness, are all the species present, Simpson's index looks at evenness and answers the question, are any species overgrown? Ideally, we want Simpson's to be greater than 0.75. This indicates high diversity and evenness in the microbiome. Less than 0.75 indicates moderate diversity, and less than 0.5 indicates low diversity. In this image, both A and B have the same level of richness. Shannon's is the same for both because they both have blue, orange, green, beige, and red present. However, their Simpson's index is very different. Stool A has a high Simpson's index because the distribution is even. There are 3 of each color. However, stool B has a low Simpson's index because the distribution is not even at all. Blue makes up half the total ecosystem. Simpson's gets knocked down when there is opportunistic overgrowth or pathogens outcompeting and dominating the population and driving inflammation. Next, I look at the phyla distribution to see whether Proteobacteria is overgrown. Note, there's no set reference range for phyla. However, based on the research I've read, I understand that Proteobacteria should be less than 10% and ideally less than 5%. When Proteobacteria is elevated, it usually means that the patient has an overgrowth of gram-negative bacteria and an abundance of the LPS endotoxin. Lipopolysaccharide, or LPS for short, is an important component of the outer membrane of gram-negative bacteria. As gram-negative bacteria grow, they constantly shed this LPS. Therefore, LPS is naturally present in the gut. Unfortunately, when the gut is leaky, LPS can enter the bloodstream, resulting in endotoxemia, which is worsened by several conditions. One is opportunistic overgrowth of the LPS-producing bacteria, so higher LPS load. And number 2, treatment with antibiotics or antimicrobials, since gram-negative bacteria release more LPS when they die. In fact, when gram-negative overgrowth occurs outside of the GI tract, LPS is a major contributing factor in sepsis. For those who need a taxonomy refresher, we name organisms based on their kingdom, phyla, class, order, family, genus, and species. Most LPS-producing bacteria are in the Enterobacteriaceae family, which is housed under the Proteobacteria phyla. The Enterobacteriaceae family includes Klebsiella, Shigella, Salmonella, Proteus, Enterobacter, and E. coli. Therefore, another sign of inflammatory dysbiosis is overgrowth of pro-inflammatory LPS bacteria. Vibrit's gut zoomer includes the class Enterobacteriaceae and Bradyrhizobiaceae, the genus Desulfovibrio, Pseudomonas, Mycoplana, and Haemophilus, and the species E. coli, Enterobacter aerogenes, Proteus mirabilis, and Desulfovibrio piger. And fun fact, on average, 14% of the total inflammatory LPS produced in the gut comes from E. coli. Finally, as you might expect, inflammatory dysbiosis often comes with elevated levels of inflammatory markers. I'm just going to give you a couple of these that are relevant to LPS. So lactoferrin is an iron chelating protein of the innate immune system. All living things, of course, require iron to grow. So when lactoferrin captures and sequesters iron present in the gut, it effectively deprives pathogens or opportunistic overgrowth of iron, slowing or halting their growth. Lactoferrin has the ability to bind and release lipopolysaccharide from the outer membrane of gram-negative bacteria. For these reasons, it's categorized as an antimicrobial peptide, or AMP for short. Beta defensins are expressed predominantly by epithelial cells and are believed to play an essential role in the defense of the mucosal barrier. The antimicrobial activity of beta defensin 2 is predominantly against gram-negative bacteria. Now, lysozyme is another AMP critical to host defense. All lysozymes can kill bacteria by hydrolyzing bacterial cell wall peptidoglycan. Finally, eosinophils are major participants in the immunopathogenesis of allergic inflammation. They migrate to the site and release proteins such as eosinophil protein X. For this reason, activation of eosinophil protein X can suggest IgE-mediated food allergy or immune-mediated food sensitivity. Interestingly, eosinophil protein X is also used as a marker for inflammatory bowel disease, IBD, and can also be elevated in the stool of patients infected with parasites like schistosoma, so it's also a marker of parasitic infection. So, what is the intervention for inflammatory dysbiosis? Well, anytime you have low symptoms, elevated inflammatory markers, and overgrowth of gram-negative LPS bacteria, the key intervention is to feed the bacteria you want to see more of and prevent the growth of bacteria you want to see less of. So basically, all the interventions we've already talked about today. There is a tendency I found to want to give antibiotics or antimicrobials when you see overgrowth. However, keep in mind that antimicrobials kill everything, not just the weeds. And the weeds tend to grow back faster than the vegetables. So sometimes slow is fast. I like to think of the microbiome like a garden. I like to do all the things that cultivate the growth of the vegetables, the herbs. I want to seed the garden by eating fermented foods with live probiotics. I want to feed the garden by eating prebiotic fibers, resistant starches, and polyphenols that help your commensal short-chain fatty acid producing bacteria grow better. And then also weed when the weeds are tiny by eating gentle antimicrobial herbs like garlic, thyme, rosemary, and supporting motility by allowing adequate time between meals, and especially overnight for the MMC to clean the small intestine. Finally, I'd like to spend some time exploring the root causes of intestinal hyperpermeability, commonly referred to as leaky gut. To begin, let's establish that everyone's GI tract is semi-permeable. The mucus lining of your intestine is designed to absorb water and nutrients, but some people have increased intestinal permeability. This means their gut barrier lets in more than just water and nutrients, allowing undigested food and bacterial components through the barrier in direct contact with the immune system and sometimes into the bloodstream. A way to think of permeability is that we want our digestive tract to be like nylons, but not fishnet tights. And all three types of dysbiosis we've discussed so far can contribute to intestinal hyperpermeability. According to this 2018 review article, dietary antigens are transported through the intestinal epithelium in many ways. But today, we're going to focus on the first two types in this figure, which is the transcellular and paracellular permeability. Paracellular permeability is the passage of molecules between enterocytes, and this is moderated by zonulin. Zonulin is a signaling molecule that says, "Open sesame" to your intestinal cells. In fact, the scientific paper with the same name is cited at the bottom of this slide. On the other hand, transcellular permeability is a passage of molecules through the cells themselves. Transcellular permeability is usually the result of antibodies against actin. So how does zonulin signaling work? Well, you can get a copy of this figure by downloading the 2012 paper by Dr. Alessio Fasano, cited at the bottom. This paper explains how zonulin binding to the cellular membrane protein sets off a cascade of activations and phosphorylations that causes the physical rearrangement of the actin filaments and subsequent displacement of proteins from the junctional complex. In other words, zonulin tells the tight junctions between your parasites to open up. When zonulin is present in the stool sample, it means something recently triggered zonulin release. So, what is the biggest trigger of zonulin release? This 2020 review article affirms the most powerful triggers are LPS bacteria and gluten. Quote, among all the intestinal luminal stimuli that can trigger zonulin release, including food reactions, dysbiosis, alcohol, and a high-fat meal, small exposure to large amounts of bacteria, i.e. bacterial overgrowth, and gluten, a protein causing celiac disease, has been identified as the two most powerful triggers. The article goes on to say, gliadin triggering zonulin release suggests that gluten is misinterpreted by the zonulin pathway as a potential harmful component of a microorganism. Taken together, these data suggest that activation of the zonulin pathway may represent a defensive mechanism that flushes out microorganisms, contributing to the innate immune response of the host against changes in the microbiome ecosystem, specifically SIBO, dysbiosis, or both. As you know, gluten is made of two proteins, gliadin and glutenin, and when hydrated, these proteins interact to form that substance called gluten that allows your pizza dough to be rolled really thin and gas bubbles to form and trapped in bread, making it light and fluffy. Vibrant's gut zoomer includes fecal anti-gliadin and fecal zonulin. An elevation in fecal zonulin indicates that something triggered zonulin release shortly prior to the patient collecting a stool sample, so could have been gluten, LPS bacteria, or something else. And an elevation in fecal anti-gliadin provides evidence that gluten may be the key trigger for them. To get a deeper insight, consider ordering a wheat zoomer blood test for your patient anytime fecal zonulin or fecal anti-gliadin are elevated on your patient's gut zoomer results. Again, ask me during the Q&A if you'd like more information about this. So if results show increased zonulin combined with antibodies against gliadin, be it in the stool or blood, this indicates the patient would benefit from a gluten-free diet. Before moving on to the final factor contributing to intestinal hyperpermeability, let's review what we've learned so far. Bacterial overgrowth, especially from gram-negative LPS bacteria and or exposure to gluten, especially gliadin, can trigger zonulin release and subsequent opening of those tight junctions. Once the gut is leaky, luminal contents are more likely to enter the lamina propria and interact with immune cells, which can result in food sensitivities and or inflammation. And this is bad. Good news is we have additional barrier mechanisms. In addition to the one layer of cells, a healthy barrier also includes a robust mucus layer filled with appropriate amounts of secretory IgA. We've already talked about secretory IgA, so please allow me to introduce our final topic, which is Akkermansia muciniphila. Akkermansia is a keystone species. It is crucial to a healthy intestinal membrane, specifically to the layer of mucus that protects the one layer of cells that form the barrier between our gut lumen and our bloodstream. As the name suggests, Akkermansia muciniphila is a mucin-loving bacteria. It readily consumes mucin, which is the main protein found in the mucus. Now, as I'm saying this might seem counterintuitive. How does a bacteria that eats the mucin support a healthy mucus layer? Great question. I'd love to tell you. But first, let me ask you a question. Have you ever grown basil? What happens if you forget to prune your basil? If you forget to prune your basil plant goes into the senescent stage of life. Instead of continuously producing young, supple, delicious leaves, the basil stem becomes really woody, the plant starts to flower, the leaves become old, tough, and bitter, really not good for eating. However, if you regularly trim your basil plant, it will continuously produce those tender, young, delicious leaves. And of course, you don't want to over-harvest your basil as it will die without leaves, so there's definitely a balance. In a similar way, Akkermansia eating mucin triggers your goblet cells to create new, robust, supple mucin. So too little Akkermansia actually increases risk of intestinal hyperpermeability by allowing the mucus layer to get old and crusty. But also, too much Akkermansia increases risk of hyperpermeability by thinning the mucin and mucus layer too much. So here are all the ways to support low Akkermansia. Number 1 is eating red polyphenols. Akkermansia loves the polyphenols found in cranberry, grapeseed, pomegranates. Also berberine. Although it has antimicrobial properties, berberine also stimulates mucin secretion by the goblet cells. Pu'er tea. This is made from the same leaf as green, white, and black tea, but it's been fermented. Also, intermittent fasting has been shown to support growth of Akkermansia. So, getting that 12 hours or more each night is going to help grow Akkermansia while you sleep. And you can also now reintroduce by taking an Akkermansia probiotic. In summary, the key strategies for enhancing and sustaining gut health include strengthening vagal tone, supporting robust digestion, promoting motility, feeding commensals, and maintaining intestinal barrier integrity, which may require avoiding gluten. Now, before we end, I want to remind you that you get to choose how much information to include in the reports you download for yourself or the report you share with your patients. You do have 3 options with Vibrant, which is the summary with interpretation, and all markers. I, of course, prefer the report that includes all 3 options combined, as it is the most comprehensive. Note the gut zoomer interpretation view includes report comments. This is a great resource for learning more about each marker and identifying specific therapies and supplements to support your patients. Vibrant also offers a 43-page interpretive guide. Additionally, once you become a Vibrant provider and order a test, you get free clinical consults. Simply log into your provider portal to schedule a clinical consultation and choose from any Vibrant clinical team member who consults on the test. One of the biggest advantages of ordering from Vibrant Wellness is that we have over 40 tests to choose from, including stool testing, toxin testing, food reactions, nutrients, and infections like tick-borne diseases. Instead of shipping test kits from multiple companies with disparate collection instructions, Vibrant orders are one lab, one box, making it easier for your sick patients to collect their samples. Vibrant also has speedy turnaround times. For example, 10 days for the gut zoomer stool test, 10 days for all urine toxins testing, and 7 to 10 days for all antibody testing. And it's easy to become a Vibrant provider. All you need is an NPI number. Visit www.vibrant-wellness.com to get started. Thank you for your time and attention. I hope you found my framework for addressing dysbiosis helpful, and I am now happy to answer any questions.